This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs to create extraordinary success.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm Justin.
And I'm Elise. Welcome to the show.
Guys, I know so often we talk about how do we show up better in this world? How do we truly own who we are and empower those people around us to be better? And our guest today just embodies this to the nth degree. He's started a movement, something that is not small, but something that is actually shaking the world in a very unique way when it comes to masculinity, when it comes to fatherhood, when it comes to being a role model for those that you're bringing up and how you live in your power. And so I couldn't be more excited to introduce Ryan Michler. Ryan, it's so great to see you, and thank you for spending a little bit of your busy day with us.
Yeah, you bet. I've been looking forward to the conversation, so glad we can make it happen today.
Absolutely. So Ryan, can you kind of tell our audience a little bit about what Order of Man is, what it stands for, and I'm really curious as to what meaningful items happened in your life to inspire you and create that purpose-driven motivation to create this movement.
Yeah, so Order of Man's a project I started in March of 2015. So we're actually coming up on 7 years now, which is crazy to think. But when I started, really, it was a goal to have conversations with interesting men. So I launched a podcast, like I said, in March of 2015. And since then, we've interviewed, I want to say, over 350 or 360 incredibly successful men. We've done over 850 podcasts at this point. So we've done a lot of work. We've
Don't
got
shy away.
events and we've got a course.
Don't shy away. Tell people how many downloads you have, how many people have you reached. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think at this point I know we're well over 45 million downloads at this point. So to see how far it's come is, I don't want to say I'm shocked that we have success, because I've never really got involved in anything I don't think I'd be relatively successful in. But it is fascinating. It is exciting to know that the work that we're doing for these guys is really resonating. So yeah, it all started with a podcast, but we've moved into events and books, and we've got a brotherhood of I think it's over 1,100 men now that are all part of a brotherhood where we work together and hold each other accountable. So it's really grown. And, as far as your question about what happened in my life to lead up to this moment, there's a lot of things. From the time that I was little, I didn't have a permanent father figure in my life. When I got married, I really struggled with how to lead my wife effectively. When I had my first son, my wife and I actually went through a separation when he was about 1. That was a big challenge of my life. And so I just started talking about these things. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized there was a lot more men having the same issues and the same background, and not really a band of brothers to be able to connect and learn from and grow from and hold each other accountable to. So I basically tried to create something that I felt I needed, and it appears that other guys wanted the same thing.
When you say that you grew up with a father figure, what did that do for you in terms of development and having to learn what that meant on your own?
I don't like to throw around that I had a hard childhood, or that it was difficult, or, I wish I had it another way, because when you're in the moment, you don't really know that there's another way, right? There isn't. It is what it is. Like, that's your life and that's the box in which you operate. And when I was younger, I wasn't looking around asking myself why it was the way it was. It just was. That wasn't something I was really considering or contemplating. Except for, I remember vividly when my mom went through a divorce with my stepfather, how hard that was on me, because even though he wasn't a great man and didn't really have a lot of redeeming qualities when it came to fatherhood and him being a husband and the leader of the family, there was still a connection that I had there with him. So that was difficult. But as I got older, I started looking around and seeing my friends who were going camping with their fathers, or they learned how to hunt with their fathers. And there was just a connection that I just didn't have. But it really didn't manifest itself as a problem until I got married and started having kids of my own, when I realized I was very, very deficient in this department. So I struggled, I floundered, I flopped around. Fortunately, I was smart enough or lucky enough. I don't know what it is necessarily, to think and consider that maybe I need some mentors. Maybe I need some people in my life to help me out with this. And that helped me get on the right path. And it's been a journey ever since.
The struggles that you had specifically when you got married and you had your first son, and I know you said that you didn't, we only know what we know. It's that
Right.
unconscious incompetent stage, like we're not aware of what we don't know when we grew up. What stood out to you now that looking back and you're like, these are certain signs that I know I didn't have certain things, or these were the big pillars that I was just unable to operate in because I didn't know any better. But knowing now, these are the signs to look for. This is the understanding of what we should be as men to help lead our spouses in a quality way, to help lead our sons and daughters in a greater way.
Yeah, so I personally work best under frameworks that just helps me remember things and give me a path to run on. So the framework that I've identified for men is protect, provide, preside. And I feel like at this point, if we are working towards becoming more capable and proficient in those roles, not only will we be more fulfilled as men, but we'll also be more productive and effective and lead those that we strive to lead. So, if you look at each of those, so protect is obviously protecting yourself, being capable of doing that, but also protecting your loved ones and even people who are incapable of protecting themselves. Provide is the mental, emotional, and even financial support and provisions that the people relying upon us need. And then preside is synonymous with leadership. So, if I were to look at my role models as a young man, uh, my stepfather in particular was great with the financial aspect of the provision component of masculinity. He was very, very good at that. Very successful, had a great business, very, very savvy when it came to that. And he actually taught me a lot about that, but lacked in the other departments. And so it's been my goal to do that, help other men with this, of course, but even more importantly than that, and I think this goes in line with what you guys talk about is ownership, is really doing that for myself and learning how to be not just one dimensional, but a multifaceted, a well-rounded man who can accomplish all that he has to accomplish, not just make a boatload of money. Or, alternative to that is, somebody who shows up to his kids' game all the time and is at every game, but he can't put food on the table. Well, that's also a problem. Or the individual, and I know that you deal a lot in the physical fitness space, an individual who's extremely healthy but is broke and emotionally detached. Is that any better? No, of course not. So really what I'm trying to do for myself and help other men do is be well-rounded, is to hit all three of those components. Sometimes we have to focus on one more than another. Sometimes, right now, for example, I'm head down into writing my next book. And so my kids and my wife understand that takes a lot of my time. And so it's heavily weighted towards that currently. And there might be other times, in the next week or two, as we get to Christmas, where, I can put some of this stuff away. We just spent a week in Mexico together as a family. And I could put a lot of that stuff away and be more present with them. So, it just changes, but we need to be able to be capable of dealing with all three of those realms.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And I want to go back to the idea of vulnerability, which you made a comment earlier saying, you're going through a really tough time in your life. And we live in a world where whether you're a man or a woman, vulnerability is seen as a weakness, right? I know even me being a woman, the experience for myself was in the workplace. If you were vulnerable, it was seen as weakness. Same thing, a man amongst your peers, if you're vulnerable, oftentimes it's seen as weakness. And the place in which you've gotten to now is real stuff, right? I mean, you're talking about being able to provide provision and protect your family. I mean, that coming to that place takes vulnerability itself to be able to get that deep. So I'd love to hear from you your experience with that and what it was that finally allowed you to get to the point where you're like, no, actually vulnerability can be a superpower and not actually a weakness at all.
I agree with the premise of what you're saying. I actually don't like that word vulnerability. because I think it means something else. And I think too many people have taken it to the extreme, and they use that term as the card to be a victim, right? And, oh, well, the reason I don't have this is because my child, and the reason I don't have that is because my boss, and the reason my marriage is because my wife or my husband are this way. But I'm just being vulnerable. I'm just speaking my truth. It's like, okay, well, like, what does that lead to? And so that's the issue I take with that. There's actually another word that I think is more fitting for what we're talking about, and it's just humility. It's just being humble, and all of us have got kicked in the teeth from time to time through experiences that we've had, whether that's illness or a job loss or breakups or financial hardship. And it's just being humble, acknowledging that you don't know everything, acknowledging that we are at times inferior, and then doing something about it. And that's where I think the vulnerability conversation stops. Is it seems to me that it's just become a buzzword for just being vulnerable, and it doesn't lead to anything. It's like, well, here I am, it's like, okay, and therefore what are you going to do about it? And that's what I'd like to see more people move towards is, okay, yeah, so you had a rough childhood. Welcome to the club of millions and millions of people who have had a rough childhood. I actually don't consider myself in that club because I had a great childhood, but I know there are people who had very challenging childhoods, from physical, mental, emotional, even sexual abuse. And I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm saying that if you're going to be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable, that's not really going to lead to anything in particular. But if you're humble enough to accept that maybe you had some cards that were dealt to you, or maybe there's some things that were a result of your own choices and decisions, and then you can learn to shore those things up. So I don't think that we disagree in principle. I just think the way that we approach it might just be slightly defined differently.
Yeah, it's like taking ownership. You have to finally take ownership of your vulnerability, and when it really transforms into a powerful place to be, that is what you're referring to. Humility is fully being able to take ownership of that.
And that's what it should lead to, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about vulnerability or the term I just used, humility, it should lead you to being better. And I feel like so many people have got, right, because some people have just got caught in this like victim cycle, where, well, I was a victim because this thing happened to me. And because this thing happened to me, I'm a loser in some capacity. And therefore, because I'm a loser, then that's somebody else's fault. And it's just like this perpetuating cycle of victimhood and loser mentality. And I think we ought to just embrace it. Yeah, this happened and it sucked. And so here's what I'm going to do moving forward to be better and to serve other people more effectively.
Rise above it. I love it. Absolutely. Because otherwise, you're right. You can really get stuck in a what I call high catabolic state, which is high stress, or what you're calling that loser, like feeling like you're just a loser and you're in that victimhood.
Yeah. And that stress, I mean, that's a real thing. I've been thinking a lot about that over the past 6 to 12 months. I tend to operate pretty hot, meaning I'm always go 100% go. And I noticed myself being overwhelmed and having a lot of stress. And I used to pride myself on my ability to handle that. And certainly we're all capable of handling that to a degree, but it's just not as effective and efficient as it can be. So I've really tried to be better about, saying no to some things, knowing exactly what I want to do, planning out my day, sticking to that schedule, giving myself some breaks periodically throughout the day as needed, finding outlets like jujitsu is a big outlet for me that help reduce that level of stress, but still allow me to be productive, because being stressed out is not an excuse not to be productive. It just means you need to find a way to manage it more effectively so you can continue to be effective over the long haul.
We talk a lot about that stress that you just kind of verbalized. And the crazy thing about our bodies is that it can't determine or dissociate between mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional stress. It just has one reaction to what's going on in our life in any one of those categories. And so that overwhelm that we start to feel, or that frustration we start to feel, or that chronic stress reaction that we start to feel, takes a toll on us. And it quite frankly limits our ability to be humble, limits our ability to lean into that vulnerability and own that vulnerability, or even better, in the framework that you said, be able to protect, provide, and preside. And the coming back to the awareness factor, you've literally just defined ownership. You go, I've become aware of the stress that I live in. By understanding that, I've taken actions A, B, C, D, and E to ultimately try to alleviate it, so that I can now live in my 3 frameworks for my family. And I'm curious as to, as you've gone through these things, like there's different seasons in everybody's life. And as you've started to go through these, operate within your own framework of protect, provide, for preside, what changes have you seen in your kids? And what changes have you seen in your wife?
I want to answer that, but I want to go back to something about the stress, because I think it's really important. And this is also comes with the awareness and ownership of how you get stressed. So I think people do different things when they have these stressors, what mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, like you were talking about. And, you know, it tends to be fight or flight, right? A lot of people will shut down, they'll run away from it. They'll hide, and they don't want anything to do with it. I'm not downplaying or judging that. That's just a natural response to it. I personally don't do that. What I do is I fight. So if I'm stressed out, I will go on a rampage. I will go on a tear. The volume of my voice gets louder. My actions are quicker. And what I end up doing is I end up leaving a wake of collateral damage in my path, because I yell at people, not because I don't like them, but just because I need to get things done. Just drive. We got to get through this, like bear down and go. So I bring that up because when you ask, how has this improved the relationship with your wife, and how has she improved, and how have my kids improved? Well, through my own actions of ownership and realizing that when I get stressed, I fight, and I fight my wife and my kids. How is that going to help me lead them effectively? Certainly it's not. So what I found is that as I can manage my schedule more effectively, I can give myself the space and the margin I need to produce at high levels. And then I learn to say no to the things I shouldn't be doing. It allows me to be more clear, more confident, and even more empathetic with the people I'm trying to lead, because I have time to do it. If I don't have time to do it, then it's like, no, we can't think about how your feelings are right now, because we have to do this thing. And that's the problem. So what I've noticed in my wife and my children is that their attitude, even though they have, of course, their own thoughts and desires and goals and ambitions, but a lot of the times their attitude mirrors mine. So if I'm stressed out and I'm fighting, then they're going to be stressed out. Now they're fighting back. Or if their response is to flee, and then that's what they do. But if I'm calm and I'm clear and I'm present and I'm available, they mirror that. And we can have meaningful discussions. We can go deep into conversations that, frankly, a lot of people aren't having with their spouse and their children, because we have the space to do it. We have the mental and emotional capacity to do it. And there's an understanding that we can interact and have this dialogue that I think is crucial to a successful relationship. So look, I think I know this is not popular, but I believe that the man is the head of the household. And if you want to ensure that your family is running smoothly and the household is running smoothly, then that's largely an indicator of how you're showing up.
So I think it's really interesting to hear that perspective. And, you know, I had a very different opinion as well myself. I likely would have said I don't agree with you, but after some recent experiences I've been through, I do tend to agree with that. And it's about being able to show up as the leader so that everybody else around you can also show up as the best version of themselves, and the best version of they can be the best leaders for everybody else as well. What I'm really curious to understand from you is, what do you think it takes to be able to do that, right? You have the framework, but what are those internal qualities? We talked about awareness, right? If you don't have a self-awareness of yourself, this is likely something you can't do. We talked about humility. If you are not able to show up with humility because of that self-awareness, then likely this is something that you cannot do. You cannot show up in this self-leadership way to be able to lead others. So what for you is it that you think it takes to really be able to do this successfully?
Well, I want to answer that, but I also want to hit on what you just said is, and I want to be really clear about this too, even though I believe that the man is the head of the household, that doesn't mean that my wife doesn't lead. It doesn't mean that I don't value what she brings to the table. It doesn't mean that I think I'm above her or more important than her, or that her opinion and her perspective and her desires don't matter. They certainly do. And any great leader would acknowledge that, right? If I'm supposed to be leading my wife and my children in an effective way, then yes, I have to take that into consideration. The other thing that I've noticed is that as I've stepped more fully into that role, and I'll get to your question because it's a powerful question. It allows my wife to lead in a feminine way.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm masculine, right? And I heard it described this way is that there's certain things that men major in that women minor in, and there's certain things that women major in that men minor in. I thought that was a great way to say it, because it's not exclusively that we are the leaders as men, and it's not exclusively that women are, for example, the nurturers as women. That's not always the case, majors and minors. But what I've realized is that as I've learned how to be more proficient in my major, masculinity, it's allowed my wife the space and the margin to major in the feminine aspects that she wants to develop and grow and lead in. So
you must be in my brain, because that's almost exactly how I came to understand it, you know, in the experiences that I had, because for me, I come from a background where I lead with masculinity, right? I tend to be stronger. I tend to have my minor be my major, right? And when you really become self-aware, take a step back and say, you know what, actually, what does it look like to lead as a woman? It looks very different than leading as a man. So
yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. And I want to make sure she has the space and the capacity to be able to do that. But, you know, even early on in our marriage, I was asking her to do everything. You know, I was struggling in my financial planning practice at the time, and things weren't good. The finances weren't great. And I would come home and I'd lean on her for, you know, emotional support, and I wouldn't be able to produce any of this on my own. And I was asking her to fulfill both of our roles. I was asking her to do it. Well, that's not going to last long. I mean, she's going to burn out. Right. And so, and you know, she's burning out if you hear things like, well, you know, my wife says she doesn't love me anymore. She's not in love with me, or the spark is gone, or isn't what it once was. Right. Because you burned it out. You sucked all the energy and life out of the room. You asked her to provide all of the fuel, and now she's burned out. So step up and start to lead effectively as a man. Provide your own source of fuel so she can rely on that as needed. And then she can provide her own source of fuel, and you can potentially rely on that as needed. But we both have to bring something to the table. I get so frustrated with, I would say, modern culture in telling women that they need to act like men in order to prove that they're equal or worthy of the same thing men are. Why? You know, why does a woman need to act like a man to prove that she's valuable? I don't think that's the case. You know, and it's just a frustrating thing. Take my wife, for example. So my wife, over the past 13 years now, because she stopped working outside of the house when we started having kids, our oldest is 13. She, you know, people will downplay that, even women. Oh, well, you know, your husband's just, he just wants you here at home, and you can't go out and fulfill your own dreams and desires. Who do you think you are? What, have you ever considered that maybe her desire is to be fully present and available for her children, for me at home, to turn this structure of wood and brick and drywall into a home that we love being here, a sanctuary from the rest of the world? And you're telling me that's inferior work, or that she's not reaching her true potential? Look, I'm not going to judge a woman who wants to go into the workforce and do something great outside of the home, but you damn well better not be judging women who decide that they want to do the same thing within the walls of their home. That to me is a beautiful thing, and something that women are absolutely capable of doing, and I would say major in, relative to the minor that men can provide in that aspect. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about where I come from on that.
I think it was very well said, very, very well
Good.
spoken. And yeah, if absolutely. And it's as long as as whatever, however they're showing up every day. I just did a talk on this morning. However they're showing up any of us, however any person is showing up every day is aligned with your true potential and passion. Nobody should have any place to judge that.
Right. And they don't. I just don't want women to ever feel inferior. Like a woman, for example, who decides that she does want to stay at home. I'm an advocate for that. I would never want her to feel inferior for making that decision because somebody else told her she needed to behave like me in order to be worthy of whatever she desires. Like it's not accurate. In fact, it's damaging because she's not chasing her true dreams and desires. But to your question about what do you need? So here's another framework for you when it comes to what I would consider effective leadership. And it all starts with courage. Everything starts with courage, but I'll back into this a little bit. A lot of guys that I talk with, and probably women too, are really dealing with a lot of confidence issues. They're not confident in who they are. They're not confident in how they're showing up. They're not confident that the actions they're taking are going to move them in the right direction. They're just lacking confidence. So many men are struggling with this. And what I've noticed is that a lot of men believe that some guys are just naturally confident, that you just have it or you don't. And so they just assign themselves to being cowardly or always having some sort of feeling of inadequacy and deficiency, and there's nothing they can do about it. But that isn't true. Like you can manufacture pride and arrogance, but you can't manufacture ego, but you can't manufacture confidence. That has to be earned. And so to come at this from the other way now, it takes courage. You know, so any man or woman who wants to lead more effectively is going to have to exhibit some levels of courage. They're going to have to do something. You talked about vulnerability. I was talking about humility, similar concepts. It takes a level of courage to face your own inadequacies and acknowledge that you aren't as strong as you'd like to be in certain areas of your life. But that's the first step. And then once you're courageous enough to do that, then you start to open up these possibilities and these skill sets and tools and information that you need to improve. And so that then develops competency. So courage leads to competency. And as you do that and you become more competent and proficient in being a mother or being a father or running your own business or getting your physical fitness stuff in check, that is what fosters your confidence. And then it's a big cycle because that confidence then allows you to be more courageous, maybe more so than you were before, because you have some track record of success and you know that courageous action will lead to productive outcomes. So the answer is exhibit courage, and everybody can do that. You can just decide to be courageous. You can't just decide to be confident. That's, again, that can't be manufactured, but you can decide today to do something courageous, like asking a woman out on a date, or asking your boss for a promotion, or asking that woman to marry you, or getting up and going to the gym for the first time, or starting a podcast. Like all you have to do is be courageous enough to make that choice. And you can do it right now if you really decided to. And so that's why it always starts with being courageous.
I love it. It's exactly what you said. Is every single morning you build credibility with yourself or you chop it down. And however many credibility coins you put into that bucket allows you to pull on them when you need them, allows you to pull on them and protect, provide, preside when called upon. And if we're not putting those credibility coins into the bank, there's no way we're going to be able to lead in and truly own who we are as men, who we are as women, and be and realize that potential that does exist and should be there in order to reach the success levels that we have.
And it's a beautiful thing because it just starts with deliberate action. And again, you can do that. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday was a horrible, horrible day. And I'm hesitant to even say it was a horrible day because really in the grand scheme of things and what other people are dealing with, it probably wasn't Not even probably, it was not. But for me, it was a bad day. Okay, so I just got back from vacation. My son manages our orders when we ship out hats, shirts, planners, things like that we have available. So he manages all that. Well, our computer wasn't working, so we couldn't get the orders done. Then I had to go, long story short, buy a new computer, but I had big plans to write a bunch yesterday. I didn't write anything at all yesterday. Came back. The whole day got messed up. And so what did it do? It compounded, right? What started out as a little problem became worse and worse and worse. I probably blew it out of proportion. Not probably, I did blow it out of proportion. I made it worse than it needed to be. And so the whole day was shot because one thing happened. I let it lead into another thing, which led into another thing, which led into another thing. And it was a horrible day. So I said, all right, I gotta wipe the slate clean here because this is just not going well. So I went to bed, woke up this morning, got my planner out, did the things I needed to do this morning, got up a little bit early, cranked out a few emails, cranked out a couple other little tasks I needed to get accomplished because I knew we were having this conversation. And I already know exactly what's going to happen the rest of the day. And barring things that come up, and they do, this will be a much more productive day because I'm managing the calendar and the schedule, the task. It's not managing me. It does happen. It did happen yesterday. We're back on track today.
But it's amazing that you're able to admit that, right? And admit that on a live podcast, because so many people wouldn't even, they would just cover that up and they would just say, no, it was, they probably wouldn't even talk about it. And I think based on the conversation we've had here today and the life that you live and how you lead externally as well, it's very clear that you live in a state of what we call ownership. And that's being able to not only be vulnerable, but take it to the stage of humility. That's being able to be self-aware enough to have what you call your version of a terrible day yesterday and turn around today and say, no, not happening again, right? It's not just the entirety of life itself. It's these little moments. It's these little moments where I had a bad day, but I'm not going to, you could live in that this whole week. You could live in that the rest of this month, right? But you have really been able to create something super, super powerful. So I'm curious to know, what is your definition of ownership in a word or a phrase?
That's a tough one because the word ownership is kind of the answer, right? Like you just own it. You own every aspect of your life. Here's what I would say.
I think he just said it. Ownership is the answer.
Yeah, it is.
It's actually just responsibility, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
So, which is different than fault. There's blame and there's fault and then there's responsibility. So for example, if you're at work and you're leading a team of 5, let's say, and something goes wrong, one of your team members does something dumb and it blows up the task or the project that you're working on. Well, okay, whose fault is that? Who's to blame, right? You might say it's that person's assignment, so it's that person's fault. And you might be true to a degree, but whose responsibility is it? It's yours. You're the team leader. Now that guy messed up, so he either needs to be trained or potentially let go, depending on what the infraction was. Or maybe the instructions weren't clear, and that's your responsibility. You were tasked with that. The same thing comes with your life. I talked about my childhood, didn't have a permanent father figure in my life. For a long time, I used that as an excuse to self-destruct. When my wife, for example, and I were going through our separation, I caught myself often saying, well, the reason this is the case is because I didn't have a good role model and my dad wasn't around, and see what happens. And there's actually an element of truth to that. And that's the trick, right? Is that because there is an element of truth to it, it's easy to fool ourselves into thinking that that is the answer. No, even though that's true, I still have a responsibility now because I'm a grown man for taking ownership of my own life and my own circumstances and my own situation, and then doing something about it. Fortunately, I did. My wife and I have been married for over 17 years now with 4 kids because I decided to take responsibility for it. That doesn't mean that she didn't have her things she needed to work on. She did. It didn't mean that I didn't, that my childhood is like erased and non-existent now. No, it still happened. It just is a level of responsibility because I'm concerned with the outcome. I want to have a good marriage. I want to lead my kids effectively and efficiently. I want to create a business that is generational, where we make lots of money and we help lots of people. And so there's outside factors. Sure, I could blame the economy for certain things. Some of that might be true, but it's my responsibility to make sure these things get done because I care about the outcome. That's what I think ownership is. That's a very long answer for it.
I love it. It's something I think a lot of people can really heavily resonate with and truly own, to take action on. Ryan, where can our audience engage with you? Where can people lean in and learn more and understand more about you as a person, your content, but also the Order of Man?
The podcast is probably the best place. I enjoy the podcast realm more than anything else. I talked about writing this book, and I don't enjoy the writing process at all. But you put me behind a microphone or a camera, I'm all about it. So podcast is really good. Other than that, just social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Ryan Michler. And you can find out all about what we're doing and everything that we have to offer.
I'll personally vouch for that podcast. It's spectacular. I'm a regular weekly listener, and his first book that came out is very good as well. So be sure to take a peek at all of that stuff. Everything Ryan Michler will just help you lead in a more powerful way and truly own who you are and show up better for your family. So listeners, I know when we lean in, we try to figure out how are we going to change our lives? How are we going to change our circumstances? And it comes down to those three things that Ryan spoke about, which is how are we going to protect, how are we going to provide, and how are we going to preside? And the only way that we can truly do that in a powerful way is by showing up humble, by taking action on those things that we start to become more aware of. If we're just aware of things, we don't take action, it's simply an excuse. It's simply something that is holding us back from realizing the potential to do those three things we spoke about, which is protect, provide, and preside. And so we know success is different. We know that showing up in this world is different. So we need to own our different. And we'll see you next week.